When I saw the thick, black smoke rising from the shoreline, I thought someone's grill had gone wild. But when I ran down and saw my beloved paddleboat in flames with the HOA president standing there smugly, phone in hand, calling the cops on me, I knew this wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. It was war, and they had no idea who they were messing with, because I owned the entire lakefront. Asterisk, when I bought the property by the lake 10 years ago, it was nothing but a forgotten piece of land on the edge of a small town. There were no rows of identical houses, no community mailboxes, no carefully manicured lawns, just trees, water, and quiet. I found the listing by chance and bought it right away, a large plot with lakefront access, private land that wrapped around the water's edge. Most people would have seen an overgrown mess. I saw peace, potential, and a place to finally breathe. Back then, no one cared much about the lake. It wasn't on anyone's tourist list, and developers avoided it because the access roads were unpaved and it didn't connect to any major utilities. I didn't care. I built my own cabin over time, added a floating dock, and even cleared out some brush to carve a small trail that looped around my portion of the shore. It was work, sure, but it was the kind of work I wanted to do. That land became mine in more ways than just the deed. Then came the subdivision. About 6 years after I moved in, a real estate development company bought the woods across the lake from me. They cleared everything out within months, then put up 30 cookie-cutter homes, with pastel siding and 2-car garages. I watched the entire process from across the water. I remember thinking, they'll bring noise and rules, and I'll be over here, just fine. I never expected their rules to spill into my life. At first it was fine. The new neighbors seemed decent. We weren't exactly friends, but we'd wave if we passed each other at the gas station, or if one of their kids waved at me while playing near the water. I didn't use the lake much at the time, other than to fish or sit on my dock and watch the sunset. I let them enjoy the view, never complained when they put up docks of their own on my shoreline, and didn't bat an eye when they installed those ridiculous fake lighthouses in their backyards. But little by little, the subdivision grew bolder. 3 years ago, a homeowners association formed. It's when things shifted. Suddenly there were rules, lots of them. They installed signs saying private property HOA access only around the lake. They sent letters to their own residents about fines for unauthorized watercraft and non-regulation landscaping. It didn't affect me, not at first, so I stayed quiet, let them run their own little kingdom, I thought. Then one spring, I brought home a paddleboat. It wasn't fancy, just a used blue Tuzit I bought from a retired couple a few towns over. I thought it'd be a fun way to enjoy the water again. I cleaned it up, patched a few spots, and painted the name Old Floater on the side in white. On the first warm weekend in May, I launched it off my dock and paddled out into the lake with a cooler and a fishing rod. For the first time in years, I felt like a kid again, drifting quietly, watching the water ripple and the birds dance in the sky. That afternoon, I caught 2 bass and one particularly stubborn turtle that tried to steal my bait. I paddled back, tied up the boat to my dock, and walked inside with a wide grin on my face. Life felt good, peaceful. The next morning I found the note taped to one of my dock posts was a crisp, folded piece of paper with the HOA logo at the top. It read, "Notice of violation, unauthorized watercraft is prohibited on HOA property. Please remove immediately to avoid fines and further action. HOA management." I blinked at it, then let out a short laugh. I thought it was a mistake. Surely someone got confused about which side of the lake they were on. So I scribbled a quick reply on the back and taped it back on the post. Nice try. I owned this shoreline. Try again. The actual lakefront owner, I figured that would to be the end of it. No harm, no foul. But I had severely underestimated how deep the HOA's ego ran. The next morning, I was sipping coffee on my porch when I saw 2 men in bright polo shirts walking down my gravel drive. One held a clipboard, the other had a camera slung around his neck. I knew before they spoke that they were HOA. The taller one with glasses stepped forward and said, "Good morning, sir. I'm Brent Turner, president of the North Lake Shores HOA. We're here to talk about your boat." I set my mug down slowly. "You mean the paddleboat? What about it?" Brent flipped a few pages on his clipboard. "It's in violation of our community watercraft policy. Only approved vessels are permitted on the lake, and yours hasn't been cleared." I almost laughed. "You do realize this is my property, right? I own this shoreline and the entire lakefront on this side. My boat's tied up to my dock, on my land." Brent frowned. "That's not what our records show." I folded my arms. "Have you ever looked at a county deed map?" "Because I have, multiple times." The second man, who hadn't said a word yet, raised his camera. "We're just going to take a few pictures for documentation." "No, you're not," I said sharply. "You're trespassing, both of you. Turn around and leave now." Brent's face darkened. "You're being very uncooperative." "No," I said, stepping forward. "I'm being civil. But you've got about 10 seconds to walk back down that road before I call the sheriff." They left, but not before snapping a quick photo of the boat and scribbling something down on the clipboard. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a turf war, and they were playing it like they owned everything they saw. That's when I decided to check their paperwork. I spent the next few evenings pulling county land records and plat maps. My ownership of the lakefront was clear as day. In fact, the subdivision never bought the shoreline, just the lots around it. The lake itself and the outer edge belonged entirely to me. I had full access rights, including control over docks, fishing, watercraft, and public access. They were living in a fantasy built on assumptions and smugness. I considered sending them a copy of the documents, but something told me they wouldn't care. This wasn't about who was right. It was about control. The HOA thought they ran the lake, and my paddleboat was the first thing that didn't match their picture-perfect world. I didn't touch the boat for the next week. I left it tied to my dock as a silent protest. Every time I walked past it, I half expected to find it vandalized or gone, but it stayed, at least for the moment. Then, one afternoon as I was coming back from town with groceries, I noticed something off. There were tire tracks near my dock, fresh ones, from a small utility trailer or pickup. My heart sank. I jogged to the back and saw it. Someone had tried to move the boat. The ropes were loose. One side of the paddleboat had deep scratches, and the seat was cracked down the middle. Someone had yanked on it hard, probably tried to drag it off the dock. I stood there for a long minute, feeling the anger rise. They weren't done yet. This wasn't about the boat anymore. This was about principle. They thought I was just some old guy living alone in the woods, someone they could pressure into following their rules. But they had no idea who they were dealing with, because I didn't just own a boat, I owned the whole damn lake, and they were about to find that out the hard way. A few days passed quietly after the failed attempt to drag away my paddleboat, but the silence wasn't comforting. It was the kind of quiet that made your skin itch, the way the woods go still before a storm. I knew the HOA hadn't backed down. They were just planning their next move. Brent, their clipboard-toting president, struck me as the kind of man who didn't take no very well, especially not when it came from someone like me, someone who refused to play by his rules. I spent the next morning reinforcing the ropes on my dock and adding a few motion lights near the waterline. Not because I was scared, but because I was tired of being blindsided. They'd pushed the line once, and I had a feeling they were going to try again, only harder. Sure enough, the following weekend I got a visit. This time it wasn't Brent or his silent sidekick. It was two uniformed police officers. I heard their cruiser long before I saw it, the low crunch of tires on my gravel driveway cutting through the afternoon calm. I stepped outside, wiping my hands on a rag I'd been changing the oil in my ATV. The younger officer stepped out first, tall and polite-looking, with a notepad in hand. His partner, older and heavier set, stayed near the car, arms crossed and observing. "Afternoon, sir," the young one said. "We're here because of a complaint filed by the North Lake Shores HOA." I raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, about a blue paddleboat." He smiled awkwardly, not expecting that. "Yes, actually. They claimed you've placed unauthorized watercraft on their private lake and are refusing to remove it." I crossed my arms and gave a tired sigh. "Did they also mention that I own this entire shoreline?" He glanced at his partner, then back at me. "We're just here to ask questions, not to get in the middle of a property dispute." "Well, you might want to get comfortable," I said, "because this isn't just a dispute, it's a power trip gone too far." I invited them inside, pulled out my DAT paperwork, maps, county tax receipts, everything that showed beyond a shadow of a doubt that I owned the lakefront property, all the way around the edge where my dock sat. I even showed them an aerial survey image from the year I bought the land, where the lake was nothing but a wild patch of water with trees growing down to its banks. "I've owned this land for a decade," I told them, "built the dock myself, paid taxes on it every year. These guys moved in a few years ago, formed an HOA, and now they think they own the whole lake." The younger officer nodded, flipping through my paperwork. "This looks pretty solid to me." And the HOA didn't provide any documents proving lake ownership, just a complaint form. The older cop finally spoke. "So they assumed the lake was theirs just because their houses face it?" "Pretty much," I said. "They act like anything they can see belongs to them." They made a few more notes, apologized for the inconvenience, and said they wouldn't be taking any action. "Just keep a record of anything that happens," the younger officer advised. "If it escalates, you might want to consider legal counsel." "I already did," I said with a half smile twice. They left without incident, and for the next 2 weeks things went quiet again. I thought maybe the visit from law enforcement had cooled Brent's ambitions. Maybe he finally realized he couldn't push his fake authority on someone who actually owned the land. But I underestimated just how far he was willing to go, because on the third weekend of June, just after sunset, my world lit up in orange flames. I was in the living room, half watching a fishing show with a cold drink in hand, when a flash of light caught my eye through the window. I turned just in time to see a bloom of fire rise into the air, right at the edge of the dock. I dropped the glass, bolted out the door, and sprinted toward the lake dot. My heart pounded not just from the run, but from what I saw. My paddleboat old floater fully engulfed in flames. The fire was spreading fast, licking up the ropes, charring the dock, and spitting smoke into the dark sky. I grabbed the nearest hose and turned it on, but it barely reached the water's edge. The fire was too intense. I had no choice but to call 911. Fire trucks arrived within minutes, their sirens splitting the night open. Neighbors from both sides of the lake gathered in clusters, watching the scene with wide eyes and phones pointed. The firemen contained the blaze before it reached the trees, but the boat was gone, melted, burned down to its metal frame. My dock half destroyed. The smell of scorched plastic and wood clung to the air long after the last ember died, and then I saw him, Brent, standing a few yards back near the tree line, arms crossed, looking smug. He wasn't helping, wasn't talking to anyone, just watching. And then he pulled out his phone and made a call, eyes locked on me. I didn't approach him, not yet. The fire chief walked over, asked a few questions, and said they couldn't determine the cause yet. Could have been arson, could have been an accident. You got cameras, not pointed at the dock, I said, my voice flat. But I've got a pretty good idea who did this. He just nodded. You'll want to file a report, and maybe install a few more lights. I stared at the blackened skeleton of my boat and felt something shift in my chest, not just anger, but a hard, cold clarity. This wasn't about a boat anymore. This was about control, about disrespect, about someone trying to run me off land that was mine before their subdivision even existed. That's when the police showed up. Again, 2 different officers this time. They asked to speak with me about a report of illegal dumping and unauthorized structures on HOA property. I stared at them for a moment, genuinely stunned. You're kidding, right? I asked. They weren't, apparently. Brent had called in a complaint stating I was dumping debris into the lake, meaning the burnt boat, and had built a dock on community-controlled waterfront property. I showed them the same paperwork I'd shown the last pair of officers. They were patient, professional, but clearly annoyed they'd been dragged into a personal feud. One officer finally said, "Honestly, this looks like harassment." "Exactly," I said, "and I've had enough." They left without pressing any charges, but I made sure to ask for copies of the police report. I wanted documentation, proof, evidence that Brent was trying to bury me under false claims and provoke me into some kind of reaction. But I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, I got to work. The next day I drove to town, sat down with my lawyer, and started the process of filing for damages, trespassing, and destruction of private property. My lawyer, a smart woman named Teresa, nearly laughed when I showed her the pile of HOA notices and police reports. "They're going to regret this," she said. "I don't want to just make them regret it," I said. "I want them to understand exactly how badly they've messed up. You know, you could evict them from lake access entirely," she said. "Lease the water rights. Force them to pay if they want to keep their docks." I was thinking the same thing, because I'd let them use the lake out of goodwill for years. Let their kids fish off my shoreline. Let their families swim, kayak, even throw weekend cookouts with their feet in the water. I'd never asked for a dime. I thought being neighborly mattered, but Brent and his board had burned that bridge literally now. It was my turn to take something back, and I wasn't going to ask for permission. For the next few days, I kept a low profile, but my mind was spinning like a turbine. The charred remains of my paddleboat sat in a heap near the edge of my property, covered by a tarp and ringed with yellow caution tape. The fire marshal had confirmed it arson deliberate. Someone had used accelerant and lit the boat from underneath, close to the dock. It wasn't just vandalism, it was personal. The report didn't name a suspect, but I didn't need names to know who was behind it. Brent, the HOA president, with his smug attitude, his clipboard full of imaginary authority, and his obsession with controlling everything he could see from his backyard deck. He might not have struck the match himself, but I'd bet everything I owned that he gave the green light. It wasn't enough for him to send warnings and call the cops. No, he wanted to make a statement, burn the boat, then call the authorities, and act like I was the criminal. He wanted me scared. He wanted me quiet. He wanted me gone. He was about to get the exact opposite. I called Teresa, my lawyer, and asked her to move forward with the paperwork for civil claims. I also filed for a restraining order, not against Brent yet, but against unidentified HOA agents responsible for destruction of private property, just enough to trigger court notice and further investigation. That way, if any of them so much as stepped one foot on my land again, they'd be crossing legal lines. But legal paperwork wasn't enough for me anymore. I needed to make it known that I wasn't just some recluse living by the lake. I needed everyone in that fancy subdivision to understand that I owned the land they took for granted every single day, and the time for silent tolerance was over. So I crafted a letter. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't angry. It was formal, clear, and devastating. Printed copies went out to every homeowner in North Lake Shores, delivered both via registered mail and hand-delivered to their community mailbox, which ironically sat just across the street from their HOA welcome center. Here's what it said. "Dear homeowner, this letter is to inform you that the land surrounding North Lake Shores, lake including the lakefront, the docks, and the shoreline access remains privately owned and is not, nor has ever been, under HOA control. As the legal and sole proprietor of this property, I have allowed usage of the lakefront by HOA members under an unspoken goodwill arrangement. However, due to recent violations of this goodwill including trespassing, false reports to law enforcement, and destruction of private property, I am formally revoking open access to the lake and surrounding shoreline, effective immediately. All docks, boats, and other equipment on or adjacent to the privately owned shoreline must be removed within 14 days. Continued access may be granted under a lease agreement with monthly rental fees determined by lot size and direct access usage. For those interested in continued lake access, lease contracts will be available for review at my office starting Monday morning. Sincerely, my name, property owner, Lakefront Holdings. By Tuesday, the neighborhood was in full meltdown. The emails started first, then the calls. By the end of the day, over 20 homeowners had either tried to schedule lease appointments or left angry voicemails demanding explanations. One man accused me of ruining the community vibe. Another neighbor's message began with, "I didn't vote for Brent," and ended with, "Please don't take away the lake. My kids swim there every day." I didn't answer most of them. I wanted the pressure to build. That evening, while grilling on my deck, I watched 3 families across the lake remove their aluminum docks piece by piece. 2 of the homeowners waved to me sheepishly. I waved back, calm as ever. My neighbors weren't the enemy, but Brent had poked a bear that had been hibernating in peace. And now the bear was wide awake. That same week, I got a visit, this time from someone I didn't expect. Her name was Linda, and she was a member of the HOA board, probably in her mid-50s, sharp eyes, and dressed more like a retired librarian than an angry HOA type. She walked up my driveway with slow steps, holding a binder in one hand and an expression that said she was both frustrated and tired. "I'm not here to argue," she said as soon as I opened the door. "That's good," I replied. "I'm all out of patience for arguing. I just want to talk." I let her in. She didn't waste time. "Brent's out of control," she said. "Half of the board's ready to throw him out, but he's got some of the louder homeowners wrapped around his finger. They think he's protecting property values." I laughed. "By burning paddleboats." "That wasn't official HOA action," she said quickly. "At least no one will admit it. But everyone knows Brent's fingerprints are on it." I offered her a glass of tea, and she accepted. We sat at my kitchen table while she flipped through her binder. I didn't know until recently that the HOA never secured lake ownership. The developer told us the shoreline was included, but they never filed it. "We've just operated like we had control." "That's because I didn't stop you," I said. "Until now." She nodded slowly. "Honestly, we're panicking. People are furious. Not just at you, at us. Brent said you'd back down. Said you were just some crank with a boat." "Well," I said, sipping my tea, "he got one thing right. I did have a boat." Linda flinched slightly at that. "I'm sorry. What happened to it was wrong. Even if we can't prove Brent was involved. I think everyone knows this started with his ego and now it ends with his consequences." I said, "What if we negotiate?" she asked. "Maybe drop the leases for certain lots, or offer community maintenance on your shoreline as a peace gesture." I looked her in the eye. "Linda, if Brent had come to me like a man and talked, if he'd apologized for the boat, if he hadn't called the cops on me twice, I might have considered working with you. But now, no, the line's been crossed. I'm not offering free access anymore. He burned that along with my boat." She nodded, quiet for a long moment. "I understand." We finished our tea, and she left without another word. The next morning, a truck pulled up to Brent's house. From my binoculars, I watched a couple of men dismantling his fancy floating dock, the one with built-in Q folders and a small electric motor tied to the side. Brent came out, waving his arms and yelling, but they kept working. Eventually, he stormed inside, red-faced and fuming. That same day, I got an email from Teresa with an attachment, an official copy of the restraining order, now served and logged. Brent could no longer step foot within 100 feet of my property. If he so much as set his toe on my gravel driveway, he'd be in violation. And next came the civil suit. Destruction of property, trespassing, false police reports, emotional distress. We were going to court and I was going to win because while Brent was busy playing king of a neighborhood sandbox, I was sitting on actual land with real deeds and cold hard evidence. He might have had a board and a newsletter, but I had ownership, law, and now dash momentum. The HOA's world was crumbling around him, and all I had to do was sit back and watch. News spreads fast in small neighborhoods, faster than it should. By the time the restraining order against Brent became public, the entire North Lake Shores community was in open rebellion. Some residents took it as entertainment, treating the feud between me and the HOA as if it were a live TV drama. Others, particularly the homeowners with backyard docks and expensive waterfront patios, were in full panic. But the loudest voices were those who had trusted Brent, believed in his leadership, and now felt completely betrayed. A few days after Linda visited, I started getting unexpected visitors, homeowners I'd never met, knocking on my door with lease applications in hand. The first was a man named Jacob, a father of 3 who lived in one of the lake-facing homes on the southern curve. "Look," he said sheepishly, shifting from foot to foot, "I don't want trouble. I didn't even vote for Brent, but my wife swims in that lake every morning, and my kids kayak every weekend. We're willing to pay the lease. Just don't shut us out because of that guy. I appreciated his honesty and told him he wasn't the enemy. I even offered him a discounted rate for being the first to sign up. Within the next week, I had lease agreements with 7 families. Every one of them told me the same thing: Brent had promised lake access, said the HOA controlled it, and assured everyone it was written into the community covenants. It wasn't. They were paying HOA fees for a lie. The more I learned, the clearer the picture became. Brent had used the lake as a selling point when the neighborhood was first being built. He went door to door with a folder full of staged photos and buzzwords like exclusive access, private lake privileges, and shoreline maintenance funded by HOA. He probably never even checked the land records, or maybe he had, and just assumed no one else would. It was a house of cards, and it was starting to fall. Things escalated at the next HOA meeting. The board tried to hold it quietly at the community clubhouse, but word got out that residents were demanding Brent's resignation. Over 30 people showed up, most of them furious. I wasn't there, I didn't need to be. But Linda called me the next day and gave me the play by Brent. "Try to spin it like you were the one creating conflict," she said. "When I said you were just bitter and trying to shake people down for money." Did anyone believe him? I asked. Not after the third homeowner stood up and read aloud their lease agreement with you and showed proof of your land deed. One guy even brought aerial photos from the county assessor's website. Brent didn't resign that night. He stormed out after someone called him a fraud to his face. And several homeowners threatened to sue the HOA if they didn't start refunding fees. By the following morning, half the board had already submitted letters of resignation. I kept to myself. Mostly, I didn't want to look like I was gloating, even though I had every right to. My dock was being rebuilt stronger and wider this time, and a new paddleboat was already on order. I was even thinking about adding a small floating boathouse, just for storage and maybe a few chairs. If I was going to defend my rights, I might as well enjoy them. But Brent wasn't done. Even as the neighborhood turned on him, he kept pushing. First, it was passive-aggressive flyers posted near the clubhouse. "Don't let outsiders take our lake. Private property is being stolen. Say no to extortion. Stand with your HOA." Then came the online posts, angry rants in the neighborhood's Facebook group accusing me of land grabbing and destroying community values. He even started hinting that I had faked my deed papers. That's when I decided it was time to go public. I scheduled a town hall meeting at the local library and invited everyone: homeowners, board members, even media from the local paper. I titled it "The Truth About North Lake Shores, Property Rights, HOA, Misconduct, and the Future of the Lake." Over 50 people showed up. I brought a projector, blew up my property maps on large boards, and printed out copies of all legal documents, everything from the original land purchase to the most recent court filings. I went through it step by step: how I bought the land before the neighborhood was built, how the developer never acquired the shoreline, and how the HOA had overstepped for years. Then, I showed photos of the burnt paddleboat. This wasn't about rules, I told them. This was about someone who thought they could intimidate me into giving up what's mine. I didn't fight back to make money. I fought back because someone crossed a line, and I'm not the kind of man who stays quiet when that happens. The room was dead silent. Then, applause broke out. One man stood up and asked if I'd be willing to attend the next HOA meeting to help them rewrite the community rules around lake access. Another woman offered to start a petition to remove Brent immediately and appoint a new interim board. People wanted change, and for the first time since this all started, they saw me not as a villain, but as a neighbor who'd been wronged. Brent, of course, didn't take the meeting well. The next day, he sent out a mass email accusing me of hosting a one-sided propaganda session and warning that legal action would be taken against anyone who collaborates with private land leases. But no one was listening anymore. In fact, several residents forwarded his email to Teresa, who added it to our civil case file as evidence of harassment. The court date came. 2 weeks later, Brent showed up in a suit that looked too expensive for his personality, flanked by a lawyer who looked like he regretted taking the case. My side was simple: surveillance photos, legal documents, the arson report, and statements from 3 neighbors who'd witnessed the HOA agents on my dock the night before the fire. Brent tried to claim it was all coincidence and miscommunication, but the judge didn't buy it. We won easily. Brent was found liable for harassment and slander, and though they couldn't prove he personally lit the fire, he was still held responsible as HOA president for allowing escalating actions that led to the destruction of private property. He was fined, ordered to pay for my damages, and barred from holding any HOA leadership position again. The look on his face when the judgment was read, priceless. A week later, he moved out, sold his home fast and quiet, probably hoping to avoid more embarrassment. Rumor had it he relocated to a nearby suburb where, God help them, he joined another HOA board within a month. Some people just never learn. Meanwhile, things around North Lake Shores began to calm down. With Brent gone, the HOA was forced to restructure. Linda was named interim president. and the board held emergency votes to revise their bylaws to reflect actual property boundaries. Several homeowners approached me with new lease applications, and I began working with a surveyor to install tasteful markers showing the real shoreline boundaries. To my surprise, many of the homeowners volunteered to help clean up the lakefront. Together, we pulled old debris, removed abandoned furniture, and even planted new greenery along the water. It became less about rules and more about cooperation, the way a neighborhood should be. I sat on my rebuilt dock one evening, watching the sunset ripple over the water. A father paddled past in a canoe with his young daughter waving as they glided by. "Nice boat," he called. I waved back. "She's brand new. Got her insured this time." He laughed, and the girl shouted, "Thank you for letting us use the lake." That moment meant more to me than any court victory or headline. Not because I wanted credit, but because I knew I had turned something ugly into something lasting. They tried to scare me. They tried to silence me. They tried to burn me out. But instead, I lit a fire they couldn't control. It had been 6 months since the fire that changed everything. The air was different now. The neighborhood, once ruled by rigid rules and petty politics, had softened. The mood around North Lake Shores had shifted from combative to cooperative. No more threatening notices taped to mailboxes. No more HOA board members parading around like small-town dictators. And most importantly, no more Brent. After the court ruled in my favor, Brent vanished quicker than anyone expected. He sold his home through a private agent and was gone in less than a week. No goodbye, no apology. Just a bitter silence left in his wake. The man who once ruled with an iron fist had been outmaneuvered by the very rules he ignored and crushed, by the truth he tried so hard to hide. For me, life didn't return to normal. It got better. The lakefront was no longer a war zone. It became what it should have been all along, a shared space, respected and appreciated by everyone who used it. While I still legally owned the lakefront, I treated it like a steward, not a tyrant. With the help of the new HOA board now led by Linda, we drafted a simple agreement that allowed residents to lease lake access at a fair rate. Nothing outrageous, just enough to maintain the shoreline, improve the docks, and build a community kayak shed. People gladly signed up. What surprised me most was how many came to me in person, not just to sign leases, but to say thank you. Some apologized for siding with Brent early on. Others admitted they had no idea the HOA had been lying about the lake all these years. A few even told me they felt guilty, believing I was the villain when I was just protecting what was mine. "I used to think you were the problem," one man said. "Now I realize you were the only one who ever stood up for what's right." Those words meant more than he knew. I hadn't set out to be anyone's hero. I just wanted to paddle my little boat and enjoy the quiet mornings. But when Brent tried to take that from me, when he sent people to trespass, harass, and burn, I made a choice. I stood my ground. And in doing so, I showed the whole neighborhood that even one man, when backed by truth, can tear down a corrupt system. The dock, once blackened and charred, was now bigger and better than before. I added solar-powered lanterns that glowed gently at night and built a bench facing west for sunset views. It wasn't fancy, but it was peaceful. Every evening, I'd sit with a mug of coffee and watch the water glisten in the last golden rays of daylight. One evening in early spring, Linda joined me. She'd brought 2 sodas and a notebook full of community plans. "You've started something. You know," she said, settling into the bench beside me. "Something good or something terrible?" I chuckled. She smiled. "Something real." She showed me the plans: a community cleanup day, a floating garden near the East Dock, even a proposal for a kids' fishing tournament. Ideas that would have been laughed off under Brent's rule were now being welcomed with enthusiasm. "Funny, isn't it?" she mused. "All this started because of a paddleboat." "Yeah," I said, glancing at my new red paddleboat bobbing gently against the dock, "and some gasoline." We laughed, and for once, it wasn't bitter laughter. It was relief, victory, healing. There were still moments when I thought about that night: the flames, the smoke, the way my stomach dropped when I realized someone had destroyed what I loved just to prove a point. But those memories no longer had power over me. They were part of the story, sure, but not the ending. The real ending was community, rebuilding, and respect. The summer brought new energy to the lake. Kids splashed in the shallows, families grilled on their patios, and every now and then I'd see someone pass by on a paddleboard or canoe, waving happily as they glided across the surface I once fought to protect. The same water Brent claimed as his battleground had now become a symbol of unity, and I couldn't help but feel proud, not just of myself, but of what we had all managed to reclaim. The HOA transformed. The new board took transparency seriously. They held open forums, invited feedback, and stopped trying to control every little thing. The community bylaws were rewritten with input from homeowners, and a clause was added clarifying the HOA's actual authority limits. It was the kind of governance people could trust, not fear. As the months rolled by, the neighborhood slowly shed its old skin. The shadows Brent left behind faded. In their place came light, laughter, and the kind of peace you can only find when people work with each other, not against. I planted a tree by the waterline that spring a red maple. Thought it might be nice to watch something grow where destruction once happened. I placed a small plaque at its base. From fire rises strength. From truth, peace. I didn't need to be remembered as the man who won a court case or scared off a corrupt HOA president. I just wanted people to know that standing up for yourself doesn't have to mean standing alone. And slowly, the community began to understand that. By fall, the lake had become a place for memories again. Not arguments, not lawsuits, just life. The kind that smells like barbecue smoke and sunscreen, echoes with splashing and kids' laughter, and ends with tired feet dangling off docks at twilight. I had everything I wanted: my lake, my peace, and, finally, my neighbor's dot, and that, in the end, was worth more than any property deed. If you loved this powerful true story of justice and resilience, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. Subscribe now to Bright Reality for more real-life stories that inspire and empower.